Hello and welcome to Newsline. I'm Neve Walton.
And I'm Daniel Cook. Today on the programme, we'll see the campaign to end Australia's detention regime, straight patrons attending queer nights, and the lack of miscarriage leave in Australia.
And we'll also have updates across sports, finance and weather. But first, to today's breaking news. Victoria will be entering a 7-day lockdown starting from midnight tonight. Restrictions will apply across Victoria, with people given 5 reasons to leave their homes. The reasons are shopping for necessary goods and services, authorised work or permitted education, exercise, caregiving for compassionate and medical reasons, and to get vaccinated. Acting Premier James Merlino said contact tracers identified 10,000 primary and secondary contacts.
Here in Victoria, we're seeing not only how quick it is, but how contagious it is as well. Our contact tracers are identifying and locking down the first ring, second ring, and the third ring within 24 hours. They've never done that before. That is the fastest our contact tracers have ever moved.
The lockdown comes after the list of exposure sites grows to above 80 in total, alarming contact tracers. Melbourne has recorded 12 new coronavirus cases in the last 24 hours. One of these cases was reported late last night. This brings the total number of active cases in the state to 24. Victorians aged 40 to 49 are now eligible to receive a coronavirus vaccine. The announcement means anyone over 40 can now make a booking to receive their vaccine in a state vaccination hub. In the past 24 hours, more than 12,500 doses were administered in Victoria, bringing the state's total to 400,000.
A 34-year-old former gymnastics coach has been charged with child sex crimes in Western Australia. The charges are a result of an investigation into Gymnastics Australia by the Human Rights Commission. The investigation led to the creation of an Integrity Commission, which referred the new charges to WA Police in March.
Corporate regulator ASIC is suing financial services company AMP for charging dead customers despite being notified of their deaths. The allegations first came to light in the 2019 Banking Royal Commission. In a press release, ASIC alleged that AMP collected $500,000 in premiums and fees over a 4-year period.
The Defence Department is considering opting for a new submarine design from German company TKMS. ABC News reported the Navy is conducting a review into the company's Type 214 submarines, but is refusing to confirm or deny it was doing so.
Instagram will bring back the like count feature on their app in the coming weeks. The like count was removed in 2019. Instagram has been trialling different options, including removing the like feature altogether. The like count option will be available as a feature that can be turned on by users in their settings.
Dominic Cummings, a former advisor to British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, has alleged Mr Johnson is unfit for his job. Mr Cummings aired the allegations in the 7-hour session with MPs, saying the government was too slow to combating COVID-19. Those are the latest news headlines.
Now to our first story. A Melbourne activist group is calling on the federal government to free refugees detained in an inner-city Melbourne hotel. 33 refugees are currently being held there after being transferred to Australia from offshore detention under Medivac laws. Sky Mitchell reports on the ongoing campaign to end Australia's detention regime.
A Melbourne activist group called the Campaign Against Racism and Fascism gather at the State Library and march up to the Park Hotel in Carlton in protest of the refugees being held in a makeshift detention centre. Protest organiser Naui Jimenez says the refugees should be released into the community.
I think for people who might be just walking by and not knowing that, this building right here is a prison that is, basically keeping 33 men hostages, that they know that and that they come and protest. And I think as well, we are trying to argue that, these men should be released into the community, that we need to put pressure on politicians and that we need an end to mandatory detention.
In January, almost 60 refugees were released, and the Home Affairs Minister at the time, Peter Dutton, claimed that it was about cutting costs. But the Morrison government is now set to spend almost $500 million on increasing capacity in immigration detention. Victorian Deputy Greens leader Alan Sandel says this is unacceptable and both major political parties are responsible.
This is the Australian government that is keeping these men, these refugees, locked up here in this prison in the Park Hotel. But it's also the Labor Party's fault. They support mandatory indefinite detention for refugees who come here to Australia. So both major parties need a significant rethink in line with human rights and our international obligations, and also just what's right for people.
There are familiar scenes of police clashing with protesters and tight security at Park Hotel entrances. But campaign activists vow to continue to gather and protest until all refugees are released from the Park Hotel. Sky Mitchell, Newsline.
We're heading to a short break now. Coming up, we'll be hearing about a decrease in foot traffic across Melbourne CBD stores. Stay with us. Newsline.
Queer Melburnians are concerned about the increase of straight patrons attending queer nights like Thursdays. Riley Barber reports.
Hi, I just wanted to make a little PSA to all the straight people in Melbourne who are considering going to Circuit or Thursdays.
Yaya's in Fitzroy is a popular haunt for Melbourne's queer community, especially on their weekly event Thursdays. But lately, queer patrons noticed more straight people coming into the club, making them feel more unsafe. There have been many questions about what it means for the club's queergoers and who can come to Thursdays.
It's really hard to say based off, like sexuality is on a spectrum, so it's hard to know who's queer and who's not. But I guess it's just, it's one of those things that they decide whether to come in or not. It is hard because, it is supposed to be a safe space for queer people, but, I guess if they decide to come, then they decide to come.
It's not new for straight patrons to go to Yaya's, or even Thursdays for that matter. For Greta, she prefers to go to clubs like Yaya's so that her queer friends can feel safe.
Usually I was in a group of friends who consisted mainly of people in the LGBTQ plus community. So it was definitely like a safe space for us all to like go and enjoy and have fun and dance.
There are limited spaces considered safe for Melbourne's LGBTQ plus community. With an increase of street patrons at unofficially queer clubs like Yaya's, queer Melburnians feel that their safety is at risk because of homophobic behaviour.
The owner of Yaya's says that Thursdays is an inclusive event. He believes trying to regulate who can come into the club would be problematic.
I feel it's a bit gatekeeping about who is queer and who is not, right? How can you tell who is queer and who is not? So I'd be really careful about trying to police it, you know, by calling people out as not queer enough.
Riley Barber, Newsline.
And now we have Gabriella Sumampal joining us for international news. WhatsApp is suing the Indian government over the new rules that would make messages traceable. This isn't the first time that WhatsApp sued a government, Gabriella. What's happening?
Yeah, so WhatsApp filed the case on Wednesday in the Delhi High Court and arguing that these rules actually undermine the privacy of billions of people who communicate digitally. And you're right in saying that this isn't the first time WhatsApp actually filed a lawsuit against the government, because they have actually filed a lawsuit against the Brazilian government for a similar reason. And this led to the app being suspended and shut down several times. And this lawsuit is actually part of the struggle that tech companies and governments have against disinformation and hate speech.
So what do these new rules mean?
So the government will be allowed to take down social media posts if they find them unlawful or inappropriate. And messaging companies in general would also have to create traceable databases of messages sent. And this will also have to be associated with some sort of a fingerprint system. And if WhatsApp loses the case, they will either have to leave the market and leave some 500 million users, or they might have to redesign the app to make messages traceable. Now, this is a bit ironic because WhatsApp is known for end-to-end encryption. So taking away this end-to-end encryption aspect kind of takes away a big part of WhatsApp.
Moving on to the US, a transit employee shot 8 co-workers dead at a retail yard in San Jose. Can you tell us more about this?
Yeah, so the latest update says that a bomb squad was searching the yard after an explosive device was found, and authorities had also responded to a fire at the suspect's home with nobody inside. So this is a really interesting combination of events. And the gunman had actually been identified and also found dead, but how the gunman ended up being dead or the motive behind the shooting, nobody really knows what's going on. There's so much up in the air, and this is actually the latest of at least 8 deadly shootings in the US for the last 3 months.
And what has the White House said about this?
So President Joe Biden has actually issued a statement about saying that he confirmed that he has been briefed about the shooting. And he said that, like, as I've said earlier, like all of us, we are, and he is also waiting for more details. And in that press release, in that statement, he did renew calls for a gun control bill and urged Americans to end gun violence in America, which has spiked along with firearm sales within the last year. And as he usually does to honor the victims of mass shootings, he ordered flags to be lowered at half staff.
Lastly, Belarusian President Lukashenko defended the forced plane landing that occurred the other day. Can you tell us any more about this?
Yeah, so the Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko has accused what he calls outside ill-wishers and of waging a hybrid war against Belarus. And he believed that he had acted legally and in coordination with international norms. And he accused critics of using the plane incident to undermine his presidency, and he said that he will respond harshly to sanctions and provocations. And this is also in response to global outrage, and which is also in light of the detainment of blogger Roman Protasevich and his girlfriend.
Thanks, Gabriella.
There's currently no paid leave available for women after they experience a miscarriage in Australia. Indiana Hansen reports.
So a miscarriage is when someone has a pregnancy loss before it's viable, so before the baby is able to live on the outside. It's obviously a very individual thing, miscarriage. Obviously some pregnancies are very wanted and very longed for, so that might be a loss that's much greater than perhaps a pregnancy that wasn't expected or planned. Either way, it's for most women a very deep traumatic experience on some level.
Unpaid special maternity leave forces many to use up their sick leave or go straight back to work. Fortunately, some companies go above and beyond.
So this particular miscarriage, like I said, I had to have a general. The children, all of my other children knew that I was pregnant. So my workplace, and I get quite emotional talking about it, it was quite beautiful. They didn't ask me to take sick leave. There was a pool of leave which everyone contributed to, and then the organisation just gave me leave. Just leave with pay. They knew it was a significant event in my life, and they knew that I needed time post that, not just for myself, but for my little girls.
Earlier this year, New Zealand legalised 3 days of paid leave for employees after miscarriage. The progressive legislation was initiated by Labor Minister Ginny Anderson.
We will not be one of the last, and that other countries will also begin to legislate for a compassionate and fair leave system.
When women leave the hospital, their recovery has only just begun. To date, there is no paid leave available to women and their partners after miscarriage in Australia. This means after experiencing a great loss, if not the greatest loss of their lives, they are forced to move on and forget with no time to process the complexities of miscarriage.
What I do see in it is an opportunity to think of things differently and to not just follow dominant culture norms for all of Australia.
Indiana Hanson, Newsline.
3 Liberal MPs have broken from their party's position in support of raising the criminal liability age to 14. Reporter Liam Webster McAllister joins us live from Parliament. Liam, what can you tell us about how this came about?
Hi, Daniel. Yeah, so this comes after yesterday when the Greens introduced a private member bill to Victorian Parliament to raise the current age from 10, which applies in all states in the country, to 14. Attorney Generals across the country are investigating potentially reforming the age of criminality. Currently, legal, medical and human rights groups are urging the state and territory governments to act.
And who are the Liberal MPs involved?
The 3 Liberal MPs splitting from their party's position include Gembrook MP Brad Batten, former President of the Upper House Bruce Atkinson, and Ferntree Gully MP and former Liberal spokesperson for child protection Nick Wakeling. In an interview with The Age, Mr Batlin, who is a former police officer, advocated for the age to be lifted to 14 on the condition that we see stronger support services for at-risk youths. The private members' bill called for the changes to take place from November next year to allow time to set up these services and strengthen existing ones. The issue is that private members' bills rarely pass Parliament because they do not have enough support from the government.
So what is being done to counter this?
Well, there has been mounting pressure on the Andrews government in recent weeks, with many groups ranging from a variety of professions supporting raising the age. Shadow Attorney General Edward O'Donoghue, however, said raising the age of criminality will do nothing to address the underlying reasons why some young people engage in criminal activity in the first place. However, the United Nations Committee on the Human Rights of Child has 14 years listed as the minimum age for criminal responsibility, citing evidence from child development and neuroscience. And the current situation in regards to under 14-year-old people with responsibility at the moment, as of May the 16th, there is currently 3 children aged under 14 in custody, all 13 years of age.
Thanks to our reporter at Parliament, Liam Webster McAllister. Next up, how the 2020 lockdown affected parks and wildlife. More after the break.
Welcome back to Newsline, I'm Neve Bolton. The Stage 4 lockdown of 2020 saw many Melburnians flock to parks and green spaces as indoor venues like bars and restaurants remain closed. But what effect has this had on local wildlife? James Kleeman reports.
The Merri Creek in Melbourne's inner north provides a recreational and social outlet for many, but it's also a place where local flora and fauna call home. With so many making use of our parks during and after lockdown, locals are concerned over the amount of waste and water pollution finding its way into our urban water systems.
Litter is probably the biggest one for us. It's just everywhere, we can't keep up with it. We are picking up daily.
Kate is the president of the Friends of Edwards Lake, a group of dedicated volunteers who care for a number of waterways in Melbourne's north. She says rising rates of waste and water pollution threaten all animals of the ecosystem, big and small.
We're at the point now where we're seeing decline in certain species around urban waterways because they're so heavily affected by the pollution that we're creating. And without these smaller species, the bigger species and the more iconic species don't have a chance to thrive.
Tackling these issues further along the creek, volunteer group Friends of the Merri often team up with the Merri Creek Management Committee in litter cleanups and replanting efforts. Organiser Chris Geary says younger generations have an important responsibility in looking after the creek into the future.
I think it's also really important to give people a connection back to this area, and also to remember that most of the creek has been the result of 30 years of revegetation from the community, so I think it's important to always remember that and sort of keep a new generation in touch.
Many people aren't aware of the true impact waste can have on our waterways. These are precious environmental refuges throughout Melbourne.
I always write on chalk signs, leave only footprints, take only photos, and it really is the message.
James Kleeman, Newsline.
Next, have you ever had an uncontrollable urge to pick at your own skin? Well, for some people, this is their reality. Reporter Georgia Barry looks into skin-picking disorder dermatillomania and why not many people have heard of it. Just a warning, the following story contains material that may be harmful or traumatizing to some viewers.
For some, resisting the urge to pick at their own skin is a daily battle. Dermatillomania sufferer, we'll call her Ava, as she wishes for her identity to remain private, has been living with this disorder since she was 11.
Puberty is a thing. It was super stressful. I was a survivor of child abuse and PTSD, and then a bunch of other medical issues that all just made it so I lost control. And the only way I could kind of control anything was to pick at the scabs on my head from the eczema.
Dermatillomania is a body-focused repetitive behaviour characterised by the continuous picking of one's own skin to the extent it causes wounds and interferes with daily life.
It's so shameful because you know it's wrong, and then it's a whole other story when you're pulling your skin off yourself and it bleeds and it scars. If there's scars on my head, you can see them if you pull the hair back.
While there's no specific cause for the disorder, experts say that dermatillomania is often a result of another diagnosed disorder, such as OCD or ADHD.
Seem to be compelled to pick their skin. There's a drive and an urge and a working up of inattention.
After the individual has gone through a skin-picking episode, they often describe feelings of shame and embarrassment, which contributes to them not getting any help. This, combined with the lack of studies on dermatillomania, results in the limited knowledge of the disorder on a public level.
It's been nosology, the official statistical manual, when it came in. Sometimes it takes getting it in the nosology to really draw people's attention to it, and people start chatting about it more in the professional and maybe more likely to set up studies of it.
Georgia Barry, Newsline.
A new analysis by Australian Council for Education Research was released this week. We are joined in the studio by Tyler Wright.
The analysis was drawn from Australia's participation in the 2019 Trends in International Mathematics and Science Study. It found that in 2018, almost 1 in 4 Year 8 students were being taught maths by teachers whose major qualifications in fact lied in other fields. Director at Odyssey Education, Lisa Chin, joins me to chat about these findings. Thank you for joining us, Lisa.
Thanks, Tyler.
Why do you think, firstly, what are the implications of findings like this?
So the findings that only 1 in 4 students are being taught by not qualified teachers shows that actually in Australia there's been an increase in inequality and declining student outcomes over time and internationally. Now, this decline in student performance in maths, it's not just in maths, it's in science and reading, and it's more exacerbated with rural and remote and disadvantaged students.
So why do you think teachers are being hired for roles that they haven't specialised in during their tertiary education?
So teachers are being hired in roles that they aren't specialised in because there's a general teacher shortage and a broader cultural issue about improving teacher status and teacher quality in Australia. We know that in Australia, our top students are possibly not going into teaching, and I wonder what it would look like if these top students, instead of choosing law and medicine and engineering, would choose teaching instead. And now that is actually happening in other countries such as Finland and Singapore.
So previous data has found that roughly 5% of teachers are leaving their profession each year. Is this linked to the findings of this analysis, in your opinion?
I believe that the teacher retention issue is linked to the student declining outcomes, but also it's part of a broader question of how we are valuing our teachers. It's certainly not a lack of funding. Australia spent $60 billion on education last year with minimal improvements.
Lisa, thank you for taking the time to be on the program today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tyler. We're now heading to a short break. Coming up next, we have the roundup with Amy Ross and Ada Hall. Stay with us.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Roundup. I'm Amy Ross.
And I'm Ada Hall. In the Roundup, we're going to be looking at some of the biggest stories across tech, arts, politics and news from around the world.
In Holland, Dutch News are leading with a story about a landmark case where the Anglo-Dutch oil giant Shell have been ordered to slash CO2 emissions in order to fight climate change. Judges in The Hague said Shell must do their part to contribute to the fight against global warming. The company and its clients are required to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide emitted by 45% before the end of 2030.
The front page of Al Jazeera features a boat accident in Nigeria where over 160 passengers died in the Niger River on Wednesday. The boat left central Niger State and was heading to northwest Kebbi State when it split and sank. With rescue operations underway, only 22 survivors and one dead body have been recovered, with dozens of people still missing.
La Stampa in Italy are reporting on the arrest of 3 people involved in the Motorone cable car accident where 14 people were killed. 3 people involved in the management of the cable car have been accused of deliberately deactivating the emergency brake. This could have stopped the car from colliding with the side of the mountain when the cable snapped on Sunday.
In Swiss news, a group led by the State Secretariat for Migration has called for better support and detection for victims of trafficking within the Swiss asylum system. Trafficking victims will now benefit from a 30-day exemption period. Their cases will be heard by a selective court and victims will be able to receive better information regarding their immigration options.
Indonesia's Jakarta Post are leading with a story about online censorship that may impact freedom of speech. A new regulation gives the Indonesian government authority to censor online content that is deemed inappropriate. Human rights groups have raised concerns that it might further restrict freedom of speech and information in the digital sphere. And that's all for today's front pages and world news.
To tech news now, messaging service WhatsApp is taking India to court over a privacy encryption dispute. We're joined now by our tech reporter, Paddy Grindelay. So Paddy, we know that the Indian government has been monitoring social media for a few years. Why is WhatsApp taking the Indian government to court now?
Yeah, so in February of this year, India introduced rules to regulate social media and streaming platforms. Now this basically allowed the identification of the information's original source. Now WhatsApp uses end-to-end encryption to protect users and messages from being intercepted, so naturally they've been asked to change their process a bit. WhatsApp says that these regulations will force companies to collect and store billions of messages for the purposes of turning data over to law enforcement. WhatsApp's arguing this is unconstitutional, but India say these rules don't overly infringe on privacy, and they've also said that privacy is not untouchable by law.
So under the Indian government's social media laws, what can the government's force do for these platforms?
So these regulations mean that the authorities can flag any content they like and bind platforms to have it removed within 36 hours. Platforms would also have to track the originator of a particular message if asked by a court or by the government.
So Paddy, we know that the Indian government is concerned about what people are using social media for. How long has the government been monitoring social media?
So this all began in 2017 and 2018, where the spreading of fake news led to instances of mob violence. This caused a spate of over 40 deaths in that time period. Now, India is WhatsApp's largest market with 400 million users, and the Indian government asked WhatsApp to help stop irresponsible messaging. Now, this started with the monitoring of some messages, and that raised some privacy concerns. But India basically kept on pushing the envelope out, and eventually WhatsApp gave way. Now surveillance is extended to the government enshrining the monitoring of messages in law, and naturally this has really concerned critics with the impact on freedom of speech.
So on to our next tech story. As demand for renewable energy increases, Western Australia could be the next big exporter of the new renewable energy, green hydrogen. So Paddy, what exactly is green hydrogen and how is it produced?
So green hydrogen is created with electricity from renewable sources, and it is made the same way that normal hydrogen is. A current passes through water, separates molecules into hydrogen and oxygen gas. The hydrogen is then bottled up and used as fuel. The difference here is that green hydrogen is used with solar and wind power rather than coal or gas. Naturally, coal and gas is more polluting.
Of course, there's a lot of wind and sun in Western Australia that could be used as a source to produce green hydrogen. Is there more interest in Western Australia because of its climate?
Yeah, exactly. So the Midwest of Western Australia has reliable wind and abundant amounts of sunshine, which makes it very attractive to green hydrogen. There's already 4 green hydrogen projects that are in development in the region. There's another 65 expressions of interest for the development of a hydrogen production and export precinct near Geraldton, so it's very popular at the moment.
There's been mounting pressure for countries to reduce carbon emissions and use renewables instead. Does this mean that green hydrogen might become as popular as solar and wind power?
That could happen, yeah. There's been a lot of newfound pressure for countries to set targets for emissions reductions. Now, the USA re-entering the Paris Climate Agreement has sort of put the pressure on countries to set targets for carbon reduction, rather. Japan and South Korea are two countries that really want to fuel their transport grid with green hydrogen over the next few decades. They've set some targets, and this has led to the West Australian government being quite confident in green hydrogen. They believe that national low emissions hydrogen exports will be worth at least $2 billion by 2030.
Thanks, Patty. We're going to move on to the politics now.
So, we're going to look at some of the political cartoons in the news right now. I'm joined by reporter Carly Douglas. So Carly, why has today's cartoon from the Herald Sun brought Premier Andrews back onto the scheme?
So cartoonists for the Herald Sun, Mark Knight and the Herald Sun have been very critical of Daniel Andrews in the past year throughout the pandemic, saying that he's been too quick to send Victorians into lockdown. He decided to depict Daniel Andrews in a hospital bed where he was recovering from an incident, a fall earlier this year. He's depicted him desperately trying to reach the button to throw Victorians back into lockdown, again continuing this criticism of him. Earlier this year there was the third lockdown, which was carried on through only 13 cases, whereas James Merlino, who's the acting premier at the moment, has sent Victorians into lockdown with 30 cases. So he's waited that little bit longer.
So vaccine hesitancy has been a major issue for the rollout in Victoria, with reports that many are set on waiting for the Pfizer vaccine rather than the AstraZeneca. This is something that The Age has tackled today. Carly, can you tell me more about it?
Yeah, so The Age has been pretty consistent in their message. The message being that all people should go out that are eligible to go and get the AstraZeneca vaccine. A lot of people are still hesitant, obviously, because there have been some cases of blood clots. But with the Indian variant coming to Australia and right now adding a whole heap of cases onto Victorians' active case count, this illustration has come out today, which basically depicts two women sitting at a bus stop. One seems to be quite upper class. She's got pearl earrings on, her hair permed, she's clutching her bag pretty tightly, and it's kind of a dig at her and the upper class for saying that they kind of have the privilege to wait for the Pfizer, whereas the woman next to her is kind of being a bit judgmental about her getting that, thinking that it's a bit selfish and maybe a bit dangerous to wait for the Pfizer vaccine instead.
In the US, rules about what people can and can't do once the vaccinations seems to have confused many Americans. How has the New Yorker illustrated this?
So CDC guidelines that have come out recently with masks and vaccination status and what people can do and can't do at this time has confused a lot of people. A lot of people are wondering whether it's safe to actually be able to even go over for dinner and are questioning whether people are being honest about their vaccine status. So there was a poll that came out in America that showed that while people do trust friends and family with their vaccine status, they're not really trusting strangers. So I guess this cartoon kind of looks at whether someone feels safe being able to go over for dinner when there might be people that aren't vaccinated.
Thanks, Carly. And that's our roundup for today. Thank you to Patty Grinley for your reporting as well. For the roundup, I'm Amy Ross.
And I'm Ada Hall. We're going to take a short break and then we'll be back with sport, weather and finance.
Welcome back to Newsline. Dog breeders and lovers say the cost of purebred dogs has risen considerably in the past year due to the coronavirus keeping people at home. While dog purchasing can be difficult, Vision Australia's Seeing Eye Dog program has always been a great alternative for dog lovers. Reporter Liam Healy is down at Seeing Eye Dogs Australia in Kensington. So Liam, what's going on down at the Seeing Eye Dog Centre today?
Hi Daniel, so as you said, I'm down here at the Seeing Eye Dog Centre in Kensington where they've just wrapped up their annual afternoon tea celebrating the 600 plus volunteers down here, not only at the Seeing Eye Centre but also Vision Australia.
How does the process of adopting a Seeing Eye Dog work?
So the process of adopting a dog is a lengthy one. It takes about 8 weeks for an application and assessment to go through. Should you be eligible and should you receive a dog, you will train a dog a puppy will spend their first 8 weeks here at the centre before a puppy heads to a home for about 12 months. After that 12 months, the puppy will go back to the centre and have a 5-month training program before they are taken out into the world as a Seeing Eye Dog. So it's about an 8-week process to apply and then be inspected. And Seeing Eye Dogs reiterates that they are always looking for volunteers, but they do advise that this process can take time just so they can find the right match.
And even those who are unable to adopt a dog, how can they help out this cause?
So the centre here really reiterates that if you can't adopt a dog, there are so many other ways to help out. You can donate online, you can sponsor a puppy, fundraise for Vision Australia and the Seeing Eye Dogs. You can even name a puppy that's on their website, and sponsoring a puppy is tax deductible. To find all that information, you can call 1800 037 773 or find all that information at scda.visionaustralia.org.
Thanks, Liam.
2021 has been a remarkable year for Asian filmmakers in America as they win big in the Academy Awards. But what does this mean for Asian filmmakers in Australia? Gabriella Sabampao reports.
In the last 2 Academy Awards, Asians in the film industry broke records and made a historic mark in Hollywood. But that's not the case in Australian screens.
They're overwhelmingly, straight, white, male, cis. So, it's disappointing, but that's how it is.
There were no Asian Australian films in Screen Australia's top 50 films of 2020. For William, Australia's film industry is hard to navigate as a person of colour. He'd like to see progress happen in a more authentic way.
In Australian screens, most Asians are in web series, TV, and in plays rather than feature films. But aside from the Oscars, there's more that needs to be done, and more being done to make sure Asian Australian filmmakers are represented better.
Ali Zhang moved to Beijing when her family noticed a lack of industry opportunities for Asians. This changed when she returned to Melbourne.
They want to represent Australia how it actually looks. But it's still main roles in mainstream film and television are a little trickier to come by.
She now sees a wide spectrum for Asian filmmakers in the world and lots of support for ethnic filmmakers.
Don't feel like you have to bleed out onto your work just to show that you feel like you have to sell your trauma or you have to sell your experience.
William has also seen more conversation around letting filmmakers from diverse backgrounds enter the industry.
It definitely spells kind of a more inclusive future. But, it's like you can't hold your breath for that.
The road is long for Australia's film industry to reflect what Asian filmmakers have achieved in the Oscars. But the first step is for Asian Australian filmmakers to tell their story without sticking to conventional industry practices. Gabriella Sabampao, Newsline.
Now it's time for sport with reporter Freya O'Donnell joining us for the latest updates.
Friday's Melbourne Bulldogs' top-of-the-table clash is in jeopardy after a Demons player attended a COVID-19 exposure site this week. All Melbourne players and staff have been ordered into self-isolation this morning as the player is believed to have attended a Tier 1 site. The club's players, coaches and support staff will now need to return negative COVID-19 tests before Friday night's game. In tennis, female world number 2 Naomi Osaka is refusing to do press conferences at the 2021 French Open, a move that attracts fines for athletes who refuse to take part.
In a statement released online, Osaka wrote she will not be participating in news conferences, believing the post-match interviews are kicking a person while they're down. Osaka believes organisations are dismissing athletes' mental health in forcing them to do press conferences. She has agreed to donate the fines she will incur to mental health charities. In Mexico City, a wrestler has been arrested after violently tossing a 5-year-old fan in an outdoor WWE event. The boy approached the wrestler after a tag team match and reached for his neck after he had lost. The professional wrestler Ina Cruz, who performs as Ina El Vikingo, stood up and attacked the child, in a move clearly not part of the script and far from the fan-friendly WWE. El Vikingo was released from custody on Sunday after the child's mother pardoned him. That's all for sport. Back to you, Neve and Daniel.
COVID-19 ravaged Melbourne's community sporting scene, limiting player numbers and crippling the finances of many clubs. But many have found ways to rebound strongly from these trying times. Sean Mortel reports.
Sport in Melbourne is finally back in full swing after COVID-19 interrupted the 2020 season. Sports clubs are starting to recover following 18 months of turmoil. For the unique Melbourne-based sport of Trugo, small suburban clubs are coming back to life. Many would have expected Trugo to suffer from last year's events, but the Brunswick Trugo Club has been able to return to playing. Secretary Alan Wilson is surprised by the numbers of returning players that Brunswick have had.
Last year there were 93 players, and this year we've got up to about 86, so it hasn't been too much of a deleterious impact anyway.
Many Trugo clubs have smaller playing groups now, and their season has been cramped to accommodate for a late start. Andrew Stevens is captain of Brunswick's team and is surprised by the steady side he's maintained throughout this season.
My team's pretty solid, so we just kind of built on our player base. We didn't have any specific COVID people come out of the woodwork as such. Other teams may have though.
The resurgence isn't just limited to Trugo. In the Northern Football Netball League, Banyule made a conscious effort to maintain playing numbers last year. They've now found themselves welcoming in a flood of returning players in 2021.
We've put the stepping stones in place, and I think that sets us up at least, I believe, quite confidently for the next however long, whether it be 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
Banyule Football Club is now thriving both on and off the field, despite other surrounding clubs struggling for numbers. President Anthony K. Roos believes that an inclusive environment is the key behind this player boom.
Many sports clubs may be struggling, but Banyule and Brunswick show just how important a good environment is for the future of community sport. Sean Mortel, Newsline.
And now to finance with Benjamin Gallotta. Benjamin, tell us what's going on with the markets today.
Thanks, Neve. The ASX 200 is currently down 0.13%, remaining at 7,091 points. The Dow Jones is up 0.03%, while the Nasdaq is up 0.59%, with the Nikkei down 0.78%. The Australian dollar remains steady from yesterday, buying 77 US cents, 107 New Zealand cents, 63 euro cents, 84.4 yen or 55 British pence. On to commodities, with gold trading at 2,449 Australian dollars an ounce, a decrease of 0.03%. Meanwhile, silver saw an increase of 0.05%, now at $35.74 an ounce. Brent crude oil is down 0.44%, with WTO crude oil down 0.64%. In today's financial news, ABC reported Iran has banned the mining of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies amid electricity shortages in Tehran and other major Iranian cities over the summer. The nation's government believes the large amount of electricity used in cryptocurrency mining could be part of the issue. President Hassan Rouhani says cryptocurrency mining operations must be shut down till November. That's it for finance. Back to you, Neve and Daniel.
Thanks, Benjamin.
Small businesses have struggled to stay afloat while navigating Melbourne's lockdown. Reporter Neve Walton takes us to Italian restaurant DiCaprio's.
30 minutes west from Melbourne sits Wyndham City. For the last 2 decades, DiCaprio's restaurant has sat between Werribee and Hoppers Crossing suburbs.
It was completely different. It was a little city. Look at now, it's a huge, big community.
The landlords have sold the land to developers. Next month, Eli and his team will be moving out to make way for a petrol station.
To run my business as a family. I like you when you come in, your parents, everyone feel like home.
Some of Eli's staff have been working since the restaurant opened.
It's really good. You can tell, obviously, if I stayed here for that long, which is really good.
To help all the community in the area, we make everyone happy. They come after 20 years. I've been here from 15 years. That's happy to see them again and happy with the family, with their kids. So they make us proud about them.
Coffee made with love.
The last 20 years has seen a large growth in Wyndham City Council's population, and DiCaprio's has grown right alongside it. This function room has seen many birthday parties, school functions, and Rotary Club meetings. The community will be sad to see it go. Residents have taken to social media to share their family memories.
Every good story has to end one day, so nearly we are at the end now.
Neve Walton, RMIT Newsline.
Now to weather from Melbourne and around the country with reporter Olivia Thompson.
Thanks, Daniel. Today it was wet and rainy in Melbourne and reached a high of 15 degrees, low of 11. To the capital cities around Australia for tomorrow, a 50% chance of rain in Melbourne, reaching 14 degrees. In Sydney, there is a 20% chance of rain with a top of 18. Sunny in Brisbane tomorrow, top of 23. Adelaide, partly cloudy, top of 18 degrees. Over in Perth, partly cloudy with a high chance of rain and thunderstorms, top of 23. Darwin, sunny and a warm 32. Hobart, a 50% chance of rain, top of 12. And in the nation's capital, Canberra faces a low chance of rain with a top of 13 degrees. Back in Melbourne, looking ahead, the rain is here to stay for Friday, but will fade by Saturday. Sunday will be partly cloudy, top of 14, and Monday sunny and 15. Partly cloudy on Tuesday, top of 16, small chance of rain. Wednesday will be partly cloudy at 16 with some showers. That's all for your Newsline weather. I'm Olivia Thompson. Back to you, Neve and Daniel.
And that concludes Newsline for today. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Neve Walton.
And I'm Daniel Cook. Stay safe out there.